Well, good morning, church. It is exciting to be here. And, you know, I'm mindful that today is an important step for our church. And I just want to say off the top, I'm just very grateful for my family and I. We've been a part of this church now a year and a half. And I just want to say I'm very grateful for the way that both previously in Strathcona and here at Millbourne, and then when we came together, just the welcoming that you've been to our family, and just the wonderful joy it is to be a part of this community. And so I'm honored to be considered prayerfully by you to serve as your next lead pastor. So I'm going to talk today a little bit about my story, myself, my own journey. But before we start, I have a question. Have you ever done something that was like somebody asked you to do something that was a little bit out there? It was a little bit crazy, a little bit ridiculous, but you said yes because you trusted the person who was asking you. Have you ever done that? You're like, I don't really know how this is going to go, but so-and-so, I trust them, I'm going to do it. I'll tell you a quick story. I remember one time when I was a Bible college student, I was studying, I had an exam the next morning, and I think it was about 11:30 at night. I was still living with my parents. I get a knock on the door, and it's my buddy. And he's like, hey, get in the car. I'm like, no, I got to study. He's like, get in the car. Trust me. It's like, where's this going to go? And so I said yes because I trusted my friend and think, okay, I don't know what, maybe something's going on in his life. Maybe we're just going to hang out for a bit. Well, I got in the car, and he starts heading down the highway. I'm like, okay, where are we going? Then he get onto Highway 2, and we pass Leduc. Where are we going? He won't tell me. And we keep driving, we go all the way to Calgary. And I'm like, I got an exam in the morning, I gotta be back. And he's like, don't worry. And we pull up into, I don't know if you remember the Peter's Drive-In. Back then there was only one, it was in Calgary. And he wanted a burger and a milkshake. And so we had it. Back then they were open 24/7, we got them, and then we drove back, and I don't think I did very well on my exam. But it was a story. And so, sometimes somebody asks us to do something and we're not quite sure, but we do trust that person. And in the Bible, there is a kind of ridiculous story. Dylan, if you can help me move the next slide. In Genesis 12, verse 1 to 4, this is where we first meet a guy called Abraham. And actually, it's before he's called Abraham. He's called Abram. And this is the very first thing we ever really hear about this guy, and it's God speaking to him. He says, the Lord said to Abram, leave your native country, your relatives, your father's family, and go to the land that I will show you. I will make you into a great nation. I will bless you and make you famous, and you will be a blessing to others. I will bless those who bless you and curse those who treat you with contempt. All the families on earth will be blessed through you. And so, verse 4, we see Abram departed as the Lord had instructed. What a crazy thing. Hear from God, okay, uproot everything, take your family, and go. No details, just the promise. And Abraham is just this dramatic example of kind of a life that is lived with an open yes to God, where it's just like, okay, God, there's some uncertainty here. I don't know where I'm going. I don't have the map. I don't have the exact route you want me to take, but I'm going to trust you. There's so many details that I would have had to ask, like, okay, like where, when, how, like what is my job going to be? Like, who am I taking with me? Like all these things. Like Abraham didn't get this 5-year itinerary plan, but he knew and trusted the voice that called him. And so he said yes. He lived with an open yes to God. This thing's not working, so Dylan, you're going to have to help me out. Thank you. And that's what I want to talk about, because today, we are going to be making some significant decisions as a church, discerning what God would have for our future. And, the next lead pastor is just a small part of that, because we are learning to listen to that voice together. And that's what I love about our church, is that it's greater than just one pastor or one leader, is that we all listen to God. God is speaking to every single person that is here today. From the youngest to the oldest, God is speaking. And as a church, we are listening to that voice together. And what I want to encourage us to do is to respond like Abram did, just with that open yes, that if God is calling, we will go. We will move forward together. And so I want to tell you a little bit about my story because, Abram's story seems crazy. Like, okay, uproot your family and go seems crazy. But for me and my family, we've done that on multiple occasions. We've left our native country and gone to a place where we didn't have all the details. So I want to unpack a little bit about how I got there. For me, I was raised in a Christian home. I kind of had the, typical Christian kid testimony. I can remember 6 years old, kind of praying the sinner's prayer with my family, and when I was 6. So from a very young age, I knew I wanted to be in. But as you grow up, and as I grew up, I became a very shy, very anxious, very low self-esteem. Like my self-esteem was in the dirt. And I became so consumed with fear and anxiety that I needed to control every aspect of my life. Every part of my life needed to have a control. And so, you're 14-year-old kid trying to map out your life, and you think you got to figure it out all at 14. And, I had everything mapped out, who I was going to marry, what kind of job I was going to have, how much money I was going to make, what part of the city I was going to live in. I needed to control every single piece of my life because I was so afraid of the unknown, so afraid of anything that felt outside of what I could control. And as I grew up, I was noticing that I was pushing Jesus to this aside because surrendering your life to him is giving up control. And I didn't like that. And so I didn't see the value, I didn't see the point, and to be honest, I was just afraid. I'm not gonna want to do this. And so as I grew up, I began pushing Jesus aside more and more. But ironically enough, the youth group that I was involved in, we had an opportunity to go on a missions trip. And you think, oh, people who sign up for a mission trip must be super spiritual and, they're going to dedicate their life to God and all these things. And for me, I saw it as an opportunity for 3 weeks, summer, 14 years old, sorry, Mom and Dad, get away from my family. I thought, this is the best way to get away and, I can have a break. Again, sorry, Mom and Dad. That was my motivation for going on the trip. And to be honest, also maybe a little bit of, okay, if I do this one thing, it's kind of a good thing. We're going to go work with these low-income kids and kids off the street. And okay, I do this one thing and maybe I'm off the hook. I did something for God. I'll be okay. I'll just kind of move on with my life. That was my honest thoughts going in. And let me tell you, that trip was a life-changing trip for me. To this day, I cannot explain how dramatically my whole life, my perspective, my relationship with others, my relationship with God changed because of how I saw what he did in and through our members of our team and the members of, me. So we were on this trip. We would do these camps in the Ukrainian wilderness. Like we were a stone's throw away from Chernobyl, which I swear it glowed at night. And we would do these camps in these old Soviet army tents. And we would preach the gospel. We would share our testimony. And here I am, this 14-year-old kid, remember, shy, super anxious, zero self-esteem. But the leader of our team just said, Kelly, get up there and go share something. And I actually have in my little journal here exactly what I shared. I won't read that now. But after 3 weeks of seeing what God did and moved in those experiences in the woods, in the middle of nowhere, it was about to be the last day of our trip. It's 3 days after my 15th birthday. And you can see on the screen, I was standing kind of right behind this arch that's up there. And that arch has this kind of viewpoint where you can see the whole city of Kiev. And as I'm up there, just kind of, we went for a walk. It wasn't anything big deal. We weren't praying. But standing up there, God spoke to me in a way that I can't even fully describe. He spoke to me by name. He said, Kelly, all these things of how you view yourself, how you think about yourself, that's not who I see. I see someone who I love. You are my son. I have called you. Will you respond to me? And standing up at that place, I could, you could see the whole city, and Kiev is, a Soviet city. You see these row after row after row of these communist-style apartments, and you could just see literally millions of people. And in that moment, my heart broke for those people. And I heard the voice of God so clearly say, hey, so many of these people do not know me. I love them too. I want a relationship with them too. Who is going to tell people about them, about me? And I wrote in my journal that night, you can come if you can read my writing. I wrote just all my feelings, and kind of want to highlight one section that I wrote. I said, all of this hit me like a ton of bricks, and I just started to cry. First of all, for the hurting and desperate people of Ukraine, and then for the entire world. My family back in Canada, my neighbors down the street, realizing what it would be like for someone to live their life without knowing this God that I had just had this experience with. And then secondly, as I'm writing this, I wrote, I realized that someone God was calling me to proclaim him was me. And I don't ever want to reject the call that God has placed on my life. This experience that I had today cannot be put into words. And I wrote, I'm pretty sure my life will never be the same. Think a 15-year-old kid. Remember, shy, anxious, no self-esteem, and yet I knew something was going to be different. And I wanted to say yes to God, even though before that would have been the last thing I wanted to do. Because saying yes was saying yes to the unknown, yes to the uncertainty, yes to what's going to happen. I can't give you all the answers. Funnily enough, so standing on that spot, if you go to the next slide, you might actually be able to, 3 years later, almost to the day, you might be able to recognize a few people in the back row there. Actually got a laser. See that handsome guy? So that's me. There's Tyson, Evie, and then some of you might know Kyra, who also goes to our church. We went back, and we got to, for me, it was a surreal experience standing on that place where God had spoken to me. And even 3 years later, my life was totally different. So where did we go from there? I'm 15, and yet I know God has called me. So from then on, I knew I wanted to give my life to him and go into full-time ministry. And so I signed up to go to Bible school, like right away. Like I'm 15, and I got to wait like 3 years, but they're sending me stuff every year. Like, can't wait to have you, blah, blah, blah. But then I finally get there. And, I remember I was 18, and you're in the lineup for registration, and you know who's right beside me as we're registering is my wife, Angela, who came all the way from Newfoundland to study at the same time together. You can go to the next slide. And I'm not a romantic person. I'm not the most ways with people. She was my first girlfriend. But why we gravitated toward each other was because we were on the same wavelength. The calling that God had put on my life, he had put on her life as well. And there was just such a sync of what we wanted to do. We wanted to spend our lives wherever we went, whatever we were doing, telling people about Jesus, helping them know and have a relationship with him. And so we got married between our third and our fourth year. Funnily enough, Tyson and Evie did our marriage counseling. So good job. We're still married. And, after we graduated, we uprooted our lives and we moved to Asia. We lived in Thailand. I did my master's degree in Thailand, and Angela worked for a missions agency. And then when we finished that, we came back to Canada, and I worked for Vanguard. You can go to the next slide. For 5 years, I ran a one-year missions and discipleship program called HMS. And part of this, it was a one-year program where students could come, they could learn the Bible, they could be mentored, discipled, and almost every weekend we would go and we would do ministry all over Alberta. We'd go to the Northwest Territories, we'd go to Vancouver, and then for 7 weeks, we'd go to Southeast Asia. And for me, this was honestly, one of the funnest jobs ever, because I got to be a pastor, a teacher, a missionary, all in one, and it was so exciting to see students come alive in the calling that God had placed in their lives. And that gave me such a joy, because I knew what God had done in my life, and now I got to see student after student hear the voice of God and then step into the calling that he had placed in their lives, whether it was going into ministry, whether it was going to work in a field that they believed that they wanted to be a light in. And it was honestly one of the highlights of my career. I was young and didn't know a lot, but God did so many amazing things. But as I said, every year we would go on this 7-week mission trip to Asia. And as we were going every year, God spoke very clearly to Angela and I. He said, "You're going to move there. You're going to go." And so after serving 5 years at Vanguard, with a 6-month-old Ireland, we moved to Vietnam. You can go to the next slide. And we spent 7 years in Vietnam. I can't even describe it. It was an amazing, amazing time. I was just there. I spent 10 days in Vietnam. Just got back on Tuesday, so I'm a little bit jet lagged still. But, you know, while we were there, we partnered with underground churches, and we helped them to do young adult, student, kind of university ministry. And it was an amazing time, because we saw student after student hear the gospel, accept Jesus, and then come be a part of these local churches and have their lives changed by community, by following and seeking Jesus together. And it was such an amazing time. You know, we got to do baptisms. We got to get some of our students to help them get married. We did marriage counseling. We did funerals for some of their family members. It was a whole thing, and it was beautiful to see students who knew literally nothing about Jesus, not even his name, come to know him so personally, and then walk out and live a life of calling in their own lives. And you know, we were in Vietnam during the COVID times, and I remember, you know, we were in our apartment, you know, locked down, not even allowed to leave the front door of our little apartment for 6 months. We were stuck in there, and we're like, God, what are you doing? Like, why are we even here? We can't, like, do anything. Like, I felt useless. But, you know, we did all this stuff. We did Zoom. Like, we remember teaching, like, parents of these kids, you know, these farmers, like, how to do Zoom. And we were doing small groups on Zoom. And, you know, it's their first time, like, holding a cell phone. And they're getting perfectly good at, you know, communicating on Zoom. And it was amazing. And what felt like a detriment actually ended up putting rocket fuel into our ministry, because where we were in a big city, but when COVID happened, you know, there's no more jobs in the city. So everybody went back to their hometowns, which we thought, man, like, we're going to lose these kids. We're not going to see them anymore. But what we thought was going to be terrible turned out to be amazing, because when those kids went back to their hometowns, their parents, their families, their neighbors were like, what happened to these kids? They're so different. Something's changed in them. They could literally see Jesus in the way they lived their lives. And then our ministry changed almost overnight to mentoring some of these kids. They would come to me and be like, Kelly, I need to start a church in my hometown. Like, how do I do that? And so then we would work with these kids to start a small group, start a church, do something that they could then reach out to their families. And family after family we would see get saved. We would see them reach out into their neighborhoods. And, in a communist country, that came with a lot of challenges, a lot of pushback. But we saw faith in action. It was so exciting to see these young kids then mature and grow up very quickly, but into the ministry and calling that God had put on their lives. And so that was exciting. We helped plant a few churches. We built this student ministry center where they could outreach to a university campus that's got hundreds of thousands of students. It was awesome. Life was good. But there was this growing longing in my heart that started to do something. And I wasn't sure what it meant. As I was mentoring and taking care of these kids who were then growing up to then become pastors and working with these other underground churches to help them, like, they are better at pastoring their own people than a white guy from Canada. But I'm like, that was my heart. That is what I wanted to do more and more. And as I was over there, God started placing my hometown on my heart. We're sending all these kids to their hometown, and there was this well, what about Edmonton? What about where you're from? And as that voice got louder and louder, I was praying, and one morning I was journaling, which, I did when I was 14, but I never really did since. And I was journaling, and I wrote down very clearly one morning, God, I don't know what you're doing, but would you have me go back to Canada? I don't know. I don't know what you're doing, what you're speaking to me, but I will go. I will do what you say. And literally that evening, you can go to the next slide, I get this message from Tyson. Hey, how's it going? Just casually. I'm looking to hire a pastor. Not sure if you want to come back to Edmonton. Yeah, not mincing any words, just very clear, very direct. And for me, the day that I'm chewing on this, wrestling with this, it was like, wow, God's up to something. And so we scheduled a call, and we talked, and he explained the nature of the church. And it's this little church in Old Strathcona, and it's going to be part of this thing we're doing. We don't really know what we're doing, but God's up to something. And he told me about the nature of the church and all these things, and just I knew right away that God was calling us to come back. And there were so many reasons to say no. So much uncertainty, so many questions, lack of details. You see, Tyson didn't give me a lot of details. And just so many questions. We had a good life, a good ministry in Vietnam that could have kept going. And yet, I couldn't shake this. And for me, I had already staked my life on this idea of holding an open yes to God. That when he asks, I don't want to hesitate. I don't want to ask too many questions. I just want to say yes. And so very quickly, we began selling and giving away everything we had and moved back in summer of 24 to Edmonton to take on, at that time, the public church, and now together we're Beacon. And here we are. God's doing something again. And my heart still, I'm not perfect, I'm not amazing, but I want to say yes to God, to whatever he's asking of me. Stepping out time and time again in this life as I've kind of portrayed it, and there's more stories I could tell, but saying yes to God has always, always been the best decision that I could ever make. Not the easiest, but the best. And I look back and see all the things that God has done in my life, through my life, around my life. How amazing it is when you are walking in the will of God that he has for you. And it all goes back to that moment on that hill in Kiev, overlooking all those commie condos, where God spoke to me. And he just said, are you going to lead people into knowing me? And so for me, the exciting journey has been just doing that wherever he's led me, whether it's in Kiev or Bangkok or Saigon or Beaumont or Beacon Church here in Edmonton. I just want to keep saying yes to God. And I can look back on all these kind of Abraham moments in my life where there really was a lot of unknown, or really a lot of, well, I don't have all the details. I don't have a 10-year full out mapped out plan of what everything's going to look like. I just want to say yes. And so I've learned something very important in that. I've had some of these dramatic moments, it's like, oh, God speaks and okay, I must go. But following God's will is much, much more than that. Because not every one of us is going to be called to sell everything you have and move overseas. Not every one of us is going to be called to be a pastor and go into full-time ministry. But everyone in this room, from the youngest to the oldest, is called by God. You are called by God. Know that. Receive that this morning. And people tell me all the time, well, what is my calling? I don't know. And again, I don't have all the details, but I point people to 2 verses. If you go to the next slide, the next one. Micah 6:8. God is speaking to his people and saying, this is what he requires of them. He says, no, O people, the Lord has told you what is good, and this is what he requires of you. To do what is right. Some translations say to do justice, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. And then I point to the words of Jesus in John 15:5, where he says, yes, I am the vine, you are the branches. Those who remain or abide in me, and I in them, will produce much fruit. For apart from me, you can do nothing. You see, God is calling each and every one of us to know him, to walk a life of faithful obedience with him, to do the kinds of things that Jesus did, to show mercy, to show love, to show kindness. And our response is to stay close to him. Because when we stay close to him, those opportunities, those moments, those things where you have a decision to weigh out and you're not really sure which one you should take, but if you are close to Jesus, he is with you when you go. He is with you as you make those decisions. When you are close to Jesus, the Spirit renews our mind. It changes us. It speaks to us. It allows us to make those decisions that honor God. And so, as Beacon Church, we have this mission statement. If you go to the next slide, our mission at Beacon is in this one line. It says, becoming like Jesus and introducing others to him in authentic community. That's what I'm excited about. That's what I love. Walking with people, getting to know Jesus better. I've got to do some pretty cool things. I've got to travel around the world to more than 30 different countries. I've got to preach to crowds of thousands. I've got to preach in a tiny little room in an underground church that was not underground. It was actually on top of a McDonald's. But anyways, I've got to speak in all these different places and meet so many amazing people around the world. And what I come back to, what gets me out of bed in the morning, is going back to that call that God spoke to that 14-year-old, awkward, low self-esteem, didn't think useful for anybody, call on my life where God said, I'm calling you to introduce others to Jesus. And so it's not about me. It is about us. Doing this is a together thing. We do this together. Listening to God's voice, we do that together. Because God is speaking to every single person in this room. And what is he calling us to do? To walk humbly with him. To do the kinds of things that Jesus did, loving mercy, showing justice, kindness, love. Creating a community where you are known and loved by one another and known and loved by God. And so on this day where we're going to make a decision as a church, what excites me humbly about the opportunity to serve as a lead pastor is doing these things. I'm excited to help lead us to become more like Jesus. You know, following Jesus isn't about ticking all these boxes and be like, okay, I did this, I did that, and, I stayed away from this, but it's where we're growing together in God's grace, in his love and his mercy together. I'm excited about the opportunity to introduce others to him. Because as followers of Jesus, that is our mandate, to be the light, to be a beacon where he has placed us. You know, it's not just inside these walls that we have a ministry. It's where God has placed you. I want to be a kind of church where we do justice, we love mercy, we show tangibly Jesus to our neighbors, so that when they meet with you, they're meeting with Jesus, because he's so much just overflowing from your life. And I'm excited about the opportunity to do all of this in authentic community. I'm not perfect. None of us are. So we grow together, we struggle together, we work together to walk in his grace together. It's more than just one person. God speaks to all of us. Are we prepared to listen? And so I don't have this roadmap outlined in detail, every fine kind of 10-year, 5-year, 2-year kind of plan of we're going to do this, and this. I just want to follow him together. I want to trust him. I want to have that heart of that open yes to God. What are you doing? What are you saying? Let's walk in that together. And so my prayer is, wherever we go from here, we go there with that open heart, trusting the voice that calls us. So I'm going to pass it over to Tyson.